So my name is Grayson Mask, and this is the second student political awareness podcast, where we'll talk about a few different current events. So if everyone wants to introduce themselves.
Leadership first, I suppose.
I'm Isabella, and I'm the president of SPAC.
Christian Villegas, I'm the senator at large for faculty.
I'm Shane Brewer. I'm the president of the speech and debate team.
I'm Matthew Pandolfo. I'm the Senate Chair for the Student Government Association and the Vice President of Leadership for Phi Theta Kappa.
Hey, William, and I'm the treasurer of SPAC.
Okay. So the first question we're going to kind of discuss is rent control being used in San Francisco. The mayor of San Francisco, Ed Lee, has been kind of getting a lot of problems recently. San Francisco has the highest rent capital right now within the United States, and a lot of people are using this they're saying the entire problem is against rent control. Some people are saying it's just supply and demand. So kind of the question is, do you believe rent control is to blame for San Francisco's high rent problem, and what do you think would be the solutions to dealing with this? And does anyone want to start?
Well, I think it's a mixture of concerns. We of course do have the rent control problems, which would be such as legislation that impedes local control of how you make people pay for the property. But then there's also the concerns of the value of the territory. Like, if I'm correct, San Francisco is what they call the tech boom area or something of that nature. So by default, since so many corporations are working there and building stuff there, it's going to be more expensive because they can take advantage of that profit. So it would have to be certainly from my knowledge at least, they have to try to, for reform at least, to fix the problem. They'd have to pass some sort of legislation that would at least make it at 100%, what would be the term I wrote? Here we are, 100% affordable, in which a certain portion of units in a certain part of the city would be a specific price that could be worked with the population of that area.
So you think instead of just rent control for the entire city, there would just be a small section of the city that's affordable housing? In
a sense, yes, but that would only be so they could balance out the equity. Because when you look at it, usually when certain parts of the territory are very expensive, it'll balance itself out eventually. Like, for example, you guys might have heard about how San Francisco made a $15 minimum wage recently. So it's already starting to balance it out. I mean, the raise is to compete with the problems already in existence, and it could possibly create some devaluation in the dollar. But even then, though, eventually it'll play out. So.
But the thing is, like, the entire government interfering with kind of rent properties in San Francisco, like you kind of mentioned the $15 minimum wage, but everyone in San Francisco already was making at least $15 to actually to be living inside those houses, or to at least be renting to afford those, to rent there. And then also, I think, even if they did set a price, I mean, if you set a price too high for rent control, you're going to have a surplus. If you set it too low, you're going to have not enough housing. And if you set it the right price, it's already what the market would have allowed to begin with. So I think, I don't know, if you allow government to interfere that, you're not really saving yourself any time or money. I mean, are you guys okay with rent control, or?
I mean, I would say like a lot of the problem with like the housing prices being so high, like trying to live in San Francisco is really difficult, and yet people have to fill like lower paying jobs, but lower paying jobs can't afford decent living. So like that's where I see the problem being, is that people who don't make a lot of money right now can't live in the city they work in, where there's a demand for their work. So they live like pretty far away, and then there's the issue of infrastructure that actually gets them to their job. It's not that great in San Francisco. Like, there are a lot of public transportation systems, but they don't necessarily cover like the suburbs. Yeah. So people that live in the suburbs and work in the city can't really afford to be doing that. Like, every day they have to find a way to work, essentially. And so, one of the things that could happen is like an investment in more suburban living, because like there's a limited amount of space in the actual city itself, right? But as you expand outward more, like you have the problem of getting people into the city to work, right? But you avoid the problem of like not being able to have a house, like being homeless and working at McDonald's in the middle of San Francisco.
Yeah.
If you can get to work and you can have a house that's affordable outside of like San Francisco, then that's, I mean, I would say that's good.
And to add to that, actually, this is kind of funny maybe to some, but at the recent town hall over that concern about property and how people would live and do work for certain jobs, there was an entrepreneur named Anil Patni, who works with an organization called the Hacker Dojo. She pitched an idea of actually 3D printing houses, where the material necessary to build houses, so they'd be by default naturally cheaper, probably placed in cheaper portions of land, and that could be another more entrepreneurial and capitalistic way of solving the problem without having to have the government get directly involved. So that's also another solution that could be considered.
Yeah.
Maybe have some of the state invest in that idea. So it's kind of like when the New Deal came out, they'd invest in certain corporations type of deal. But in this case, she'd build the houses using a very cheap product that could possibly even help the homeless in general.
There's already like a lot of funding to suburban houses, but it's obviously not done, and it has to coincide with investment in infrastructure that gets people from the suburbs to where they need to go.
Mm-hmm.
I also think, kind of what you're talking about the suburbs, there's a lot of regulations on this, and you can take this to any city like New York or anything, and there's a lot of regulations on city skyscrapers going up, and you've actually been seeing with a lot of cities. I think with San Francisco, it's expanding outward to the suburbs twice as fast as it's actually growing. The buildings are actually growing up. So I think if you kind of got rid of a lot of regulations on allowing there to be skyscrapers, you would have more housing and housing supply, so prices would go down. So I think that would happen.
That certainly is an option. Probably a tactical.
Yeah, I think just the mayor's kind of idea, his idea with rent control, the biggest problem with it is if you want to reduce price, you have to increase supply. He wants to reduce supply because he's afraid, I think more wealthy landowners will come in and kind of price people out of their homes, but I think just reducing supply is kind of against basic economics. But, yeah.
I mean, I think that the main thing is that, and I haven't researched this issue a lot, so please correct me if I'm wrong, but in order to be able to charge those prices, they must be turning a profit off those prices, means that people are willing to pay those prices. So you can't just lower the prices, because that won't change your demand quantity, it will just lower your profits, which could negatively affect the economy overall, because then they'd be able to either, maintain the apartments worse, not pay their employees as much, like that. So I think that Christian hit on the head, you have to meet this demand rather than lower supply.
But if you just meet the demand, then what happens is only really, really, really rich people can live like in the really, really rich parts of San Francisco, and then that is bad because there's also people that have to work there and have to be there and that were born there who aren't necessarily that well off, and then you get the issue of being homeless when like your property's worth like $50,000 a month or a year. Like their property is like really expensive, but like the rent is so high that people can't live there and do their job. So
A lot of people that lived there originally are getting priced out, and they have to go to the suburbs.
Yeah.
A lot of that.
Well, then ultimately, perhaps the solution would have to be a very bilateral agreement where they would have to say, yeah, some units have to be regulated, others should not. They should certainly reduce regulations on building infrastructure upward, which would be very tactical in terms of apartments, property that goes up, such as tenement homes, which is a very frail idea, but I mean, it could do a good job at least repressing some of the problems right now. And then, of course, there's investing in entrepreneurs that could also feed that, because then you have a business market that would need to hire workers to build these new properties. And it could feed the 3D industry and actually see where we could go with that technology to greater limits. But ultimately, of course, we need to certainly do a lot of research from what it seems and speak to people that are economists and infrastructure designers to understand the full length of this subject.
I mean, I'm not particularly like researched about specifically rent control, but
Yeah.
I think like investing in the suburbs is one way to get the housing prices down.
Well, yeah, you're right.
The
Yeah,
more
suburbs
houses
is
there
certainly
are,
a move. I mean,
but-
that's what we do here, and it's worked out relatively well so far. Especially when you look at New York, most of the people that, if anyone's ever like been there, most of the people that work in New York don't actually live in New York. They live in the suburbs outside of the main city, and they take the trams to get there. So that's also an option, like you said about
Works in Manhattan, lives there.
yeah, it'd be crazy. But yeah, that certainly is another option as well, building up the suburbs, and that's probably also very a beneficial option for the community growth as a whole.
And then you need the infrastructure.
Yeah, that'd be fun. That could be interesting.
I think the last point I wanted to make about kind of rent control, and a lot of people, you're kind of saying it gets rid of their profits if you put kind of rent control on people or a price cap. And that's actually true because I think if someone's renting out an apartment, they're going to try to make a profit no matter what. So if you kind of put a cap on what they're able to charge, the only way they can possibly make money is by reducing their expenses. So what we've been seeing with rent control is a lot of kind of people who are renting out apartments were not doing basic maintenance. They weren't regularly cleaning the place because they weren't making enough profit, so they didn't want to have massive expenses. So I think we definitely see that the average apartments, their quality definitely goes down.